The feeling of certainty is not the result of a cognitive exploration. We feel certain, and then our cognition backfills and then says, oh, we were right about this.
Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, an exploration of the idea of curiosity and its increasing importance for thriving in the digital age, from the authors of The Curious Advantage.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Curious Advantage podcast. This series is about how individuals and organisations use the power of curiosity to drive success in their lives and businesses, especially in the context of our new digital reality. It brings to life the latest understanding from neuroscience, anthropology, history, business and behaviourism about curiosity, and makes these useful for everyone. My name is Simon Brown. I'm one of the co-authors of the book The Curious Advantage, and today I'm here with my co-authors Paul Ashcroft.
Hello.
And Garrick Jones.
Hi there.
We're delighted to be joined by Jennifer Garvey Berger. Jennifer is renowned internationally for her work on complexity, leadership and adult development. She's founder and CEO of Cultivating Leadership, a coach to top executives, and the author of 3 highly acclaimed books, Unlocking Leadership Mindtraps, Simple Habits for Complex Times, and Changing on the Job. In these books, Jennifer builds on deep theoretical knowledge to offer practical ways to make leaders' work more meaningful and their lives more fun. Jennifer has worked with senior leaders in the private, non-profit and government sectors around the world, companies like Novartis, Google, KPMG, Microsoft, and the New Zealand Department of Conservation. Jennifer believes that leadership is one of the most vital renewable resources in the world. In this topsy-turvy time, when uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity are raging, we need a new form of leadership for a new era. If we want organisations where people are thriving and bringing their best, we need leaders who are learning, and looking forward to hearing more about that. To that end, Jennifer designs and teaches leadership programs, coaches executives and senior teams, and supports new ways of thinking about strategy and people. She speaks at leadership and coaching conferences and offers courses for coaches at universities all over the world, including Harvard University, University of Sydney, and Oxford Brookes University. She also has strong links with Harvard, having earned her master's and doctorate from there too. Eschewing work-life balance for a life that feels like fun across the board, Jennifer loves to write, to scuba dive, and to roll on the floor with her dogs. She was formerly an associate professor at George Mason University and learnt about deep change more than a decade ago when she turned down the tenure offer and moved to a small seaside village in New Zealand with her husband, 2 kids, and the family dog. And while she considers herself to be a Kiwi by choice, she opened her European chapter when she and her family moved to central London a few years ago. It's an honour to welcome you to the Curious Advantage podcast, Jennifer.
So much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Very excited to have you join us. I've already learnt so much from you from the few interactions that we've had to date. So I learnt about the Cynefin framework. I even learnt how to pronounce it for understanding complexity. Also coaching tips on listening to learn rather than listening to win and listening to fix. Those were a few things that came to mind when I was reflecting on our conversation today. So I'm sure we'll be hearing more about those as we go on. So let's start with learning a little bit more about you. Maybe what led you into the fields of leadership, complexity and coaching?
I think it was curiosity, Simon. I think
Fantastic.
I've just been...
You've passed the first test.
There we go. I'm just sort of endlessly curious about the way humans travel through the world. And when I learned that there was a way that we changed who we were as we grew older, I had to find out more about that. And as I found out more about that, I got so excited about it that I wanted to share it with other folks. So I think it's the sort of intersection of curiosity meets wanting to make a positive impact on the world. And this led me into this field, which I didn't even know was a field when I started studying these ideas.
Jennifer, in your most recent book, you introduced this wonderful concept of the leadership mind trap. Could you tell us a bit about what are some of the most common leadership mind traps, what these are, how to not fall into them, perhaps?
Yeah, well, or how to get out of them really is the question. I've been teaching leaders about complexity for a long time now, and I found that they were falling into some of the same holes leaders all over the world in different industries from different places, super smart, successful, fantastic humans. And yet we would talk about something before a meeting and we would say, okay, we know like this is the strategy to use in this moment. And then in the meeting, they would do exactly the opposite thing. Like it was like uncanny how opposite it was. And so as I started to clump those together, try to figure out what was going on, I realized that there are these, I call them mind traps. They're these formerly protective ways and habits we have of approaching the world that are hardwired into our bodies and our nervous system that just lead us exactly astray when we hit complexity. And many of them actually lead us exactly out of curiosity, right? Like this is one of their main pieces is to shut down our capacity for curiosity and to enter us into a place where we want certainty and control.
In the book, Jennifer, you refer to 5 big mind traps. Could you tell us a little bit what are these specifically?
Sure. So the first one is rightness. So actually humans, we believe we're right most of the time and about things we couldn't possibly be right about. When psychologists and neurologists have tried to figure this out, it turns out that if you put somebody in a brain scan, rightness is an emotion. The feeling of certainty is not the result of a cognitive exploration. We feel certain, and then our cognition backfills and then says, oh, we were right about this. And this is why there are all these studies about how if somebody's sure about something and then you give them all kinds of evidence to show them that they're wrong, they believe the thing that they were sure about more after reading the evidence, because rightness kills curiosity, right? Like it is the off switch for curiosity. Related to that, there's this way we make up simple stories. Humans are wired for narrative. We're wired to hear stories, to tell stories, to exchange culture and incredibly important information about who we are and what it is to be human through these stories. And at the same time, we fall in love with them. We don't notice that we're doing it. We fall in love with them and then we reinforce them. And these stories are relatively simple. So they have heroes and villains. They focus often on blame. They emerge from fear often. They also kill curiosity and they kill listening. The third one is this, I got really interested in this question about how is it that we are in groups, basically. I was living in a world where almost all of my clients were focused on alignment and agreement. And this was like a core thing for people to do as senior leaders. And I saw that this was, in some ways, making organizations more rigid and less able to handle complexity. And it turns out that we are just so wired to tribe up, right? To be in a tribe with somebody, to figure out who's in that tribe, and then to try very hard not to get kicked out. In one of the most interesting pieces of neuroscience I've seen, it turns out that you can't tell the difference between physical pain and social pain in the brain scan from looking at the brain. And then we're also in love with control. And then we're also in love with our own egos, right? We're in love with who we have been, and we protect and defend who we have been at the expense of who we could be. So there's a quick rundown there of the 5.
I see linkages as well there of the rightness of sort of believing that we're right most of the time, linking through to the ego piece as well. Of that gives me overconfidence maybe, and that builds my ego as well. So did you find there was sort of self-reinforcing as well across those mind traps as well?
It's extraordinary, actually. They create this. This is why I think of them as real traps, right? Together, we dig ourselves deeper and deeper into them. And it doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like the other person is being unreasonable. This is how usually we experience being in these traps.
Yeah, there's that thing about if we want to do something, we need to commit to it. And if we want to do something new, we need to commit to some kind of alternative reality or some kind of alternative to what we currently do. What are the alternatives then? How do we avoid the mind traps? What's the meaningful alternative that we can provide leaders to lead themselves out of the traps?
I have to say, one of the biggest overarching alternatives is curiosity, right? Each of these is a curiosity killer. As I was doing my research for this book, the thing that shocked me is how little was written about curiosity before your book came out, thank goodness.
Yeah,
And how and how little the focus is, right? On this thing that actually looked to me like it was going to help us escape from each of these in its own way. So I offer particular, I guess the book is filled with particular ways of being curious, asking questions like, how could I be wrong? Listening in new ways to one another, as leaders, welcoming the different views, the diversity of opinions and perspectives, going out of our way to be sure that we have diversity around us. And then thinking about controlling things, not in putting our hands on things and forcing them to happen, but really in understanding that what we're on about in complexity is enabling the conditions for good things to happen. And so really paying attention to those conditions that we're creating.
It sounds, Jennifer, very much this is informed by your knowledge of complexity thinking, as having just enough rules in place to allow the complex emergent behavior, but not too much that you're controlling it, stifling it, as you say, reinforcing old stories. I see a strong connection between those two ideas.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Paul. I came into this field a long time ago now, and I've seen a ton of folks who try to approach it to like manage or control complexity. And I believe this is a fool's errand. I feel that the question is, we've got complexity. It's everywhere, as we see each of us in our own home offices, right? We live in an unpredictable and an uncontrollable world. And leadership is fundamentally about, not about predicting and controlling, but about trying to figure out how do we dance in the complexity and how do we use that as a source of energy and power, as opposed to trying to squelch it or box it or, jail it up.
That's a huge shift for management, especially with the top-down management, control, and so on that's been taught for so long. So in your second book, Simple Habits for Complex Times, which you co-authored with Keith Johnston, you discuss how by taking multiple perspectives, asking different questions, by seeing more of the holistic system, leaders can better understand themselves, their roles, and the world around them. And this sounds a lot like being curious to me. Can you tell us more about what role you see curious leaders playing in order to get out of the mind traps?
I think you cannot. I think you cannot handle complexity. You cannot lead in complexity without curiosity. It's just, I'm just 100% convinced of that. And I feel like each of the interventions I make in an organization with a client or in my books is all about giving people little handholds for how to get curious again. Like you, I believe we lose some access to the natural curiosity that fundamentally fuels the human life force. And so by pointing people in particular directions and saying, do you see over there? You see how interesting that is? Then suddenly we have the capacity to welcome them into a place where they can ignite their own curiosity. I feel like there's a flywheel of curiosity. And once it gets moving, it's unstoppable. But we do an awful lot in early adulthood to stop it.
It requires behavior change from leaders. It's, with the whole digital thing that's going on, with the whole shift in business, we talk about, the multiple connections, the hyper-connected world has completely different requirements for leadership. And as you say, curiosity has got to be part of that as well. New behaviors, new ways to question, new ways to influence, new ways to find out what's going on and to motivate people.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The question for me has always been about how do we help leaders understand that it's safe to be curious, right? Because there's so much in our organizational DNA that says curiosity is dangerous. You shouldn't ask those questions. I had a leader, I was teaching about asking different questions some years ago, and a board member of this big organization came up at the end of my talk and called me said, Jennifer, I'd like to talk to you. And we went out of the room, down the hall, into another room, and he closed the door. Like, this was a very serious thing. He wanted to ask me in very private circumstances. And I said, yeah, what's going on? And he said, did you really mean to imply that a leader could ask a question he didn't know the answer to?
Wow.
And I said, yeah, I did. Like, this is what I think of as leadership. This is what I think of as collectively thinking together. And he said, but will anyone follow me if they feel like there are things I don't know?
Fascinating. Yeah. And if you turn that around, the pressure that also puts on yourself as a leader, because if there's no way to manage complexity, I mean, you can't, as you say, it's impossible to know the answers. So if you put yourself in the position where I have to know the answer to every question I'm going to ask, it's quite a quiet conversation, probably.
Oh my goodness. Or it's a long conversation, but not about material things, right? The thing,
yes.
The thing that people talk about is the redemptive power of complexity, to be able to let us actually engage with one another in human ways. And I think this is also about allowing us to tap into the life force that is curiosity.
And so it becomes very enlightening to then let go of the I need to understand the answer to everything, that actually I can still lead and not know the answer. And then let's focus on great questions, which we've had previous conversations on here around the power of great questions. And yeah, that can get you a lot further than knowing the answers.
And it's so much more fun. It gets you being in a place where you get to touch into some of the greatest joys and delights of discovery, of wonder. I think this is some of the fundamental joy and purpose of being human, I think.
Did you notice people becoming far more enlightened as this sort of penny dropped? And it's like, okay, yeah, if I ask questions, if I'm open-minded, if I'm curious, actually things become easier for me, and people respect me more for it. So have you seen executives going through that process?
It's one of the most glorious things about the role I get to play, right? I get to companion people as they begin to rediscover themselves in a way. And as they discover that the things they thought they needed to do to get other people's respect or admiration or whatever it might be, was actually creating more and more of a shell around them. And sometimes they couldn't get through that shell. And as that begins to open and they begin to engage in the world in a different way, the world comes at them in a different way. The world looks easier, has more options, and new things arise. You know, it doesn't have to be, Garrick, you were talking earlier about the habits people need to form. And I completely agree with you. But the best thing is when new thoughts arise, new possibilities arise without any effort at all. We don't even notice that we're doing a new thing, but suddenly a whole set of new options pops in front of us. And this is an incredible thing to be a part of.
The idea of complexity is just huge right now. But you wrote about it in 2011 in your first book, looking at how can we cultivate leaders for a complex world, and the need to be self-aware and deal with ambiguity, but also be open to unprecedented scenarios. Can you share some thoughts about how we can continue to develop leaders who can understand the complexity that they have to face and also have the tools to negotiate it?
Yeah, this used to be a very fringe topic, as you say. I remember as I was getting my doctorate and these ideas, my father was like, does anybody really care about any of these ideas? You think you're going to find anybody who is interested? And now, as you say, complexity is, everybody's interested in this. Because
front and center, yeah.
Because we have to be. We have to be. The fundamental notion that I was introduced to so many years ago is that we grow better able to see, to handle, to react to complexity. And that there are ways and approaches that we can encourage that growth. Right? This is we know that to keep our body in shape, we need to exercise. We know that we need to feed our body nutrients to stay healthy. We know that we need to feed our relationships in order for them to stay healthy. We don't still, this is 20 years ago, right? We don't still pay, I think, enough attention to the care and feeding of our development and to what it really means to engage with the world in a way that puts at risk the person I was yesterday so that I can be in the world in a new way tomorrow. We see little kids do this all the time. We see it all the time. This is like our birthright is to do this, but it gets harder as we grow older and we have more to protect. It gets harder. And a lot of what people end up protecting themselves from is the complexity of the world and therefore life.
And is there a relationship to, in your mind, to learning and leadership? And what is that relationship with complexity, do you think?
When I started in this field, I used to say to potential clients, I'm only useful for you if you need to learn new things because your market is complex, because things are changing, because your business models are at risk, because, right? And, probably half of the people I talk to would say, oh, that's great. It's not for us. We have a very stable market. What we really want is a set of leadership skills. Can you just do that? And I would say, I don't do that. So cool. There are lots of people who do that. Go do that. Now, nobody ever says that anymore. Nobody ever.
No stable markets out there anymore.
There's nothing, right? Now, if you're not learning something new, you are inhabiting a world that does not exist anymore. And you can kind of keep the paper up for a little while, but the world's going to burst through the paper screens that you've erected. It just is not, it's not handleable anymore.
A curious culture is a game changer. What does curiosity mean for you? Follow #CuriousAdvantage and join the conversation.
So one of the things that you taught me or that helped me understand complexity better was the Cynefin model. So maybe as a nice takeaway for our listeners, are you able to share a little bit on what that is? Because it certainly helped me in getting my mindset around actually, what are these different aspects around complexity?
I love this model because I think like all good models, it offers us a way to make sense of a thing we were seeing, but we couldn't quite make sense of before. This comes from the complexity theorist Dave Snowden. It's for those of you or readers who are interested, it's not spelled Cynefin at all, right? It's spelled Cynefin is what it looks like. It's a Welsh word. And it means habitat. It is a rough translation for this Welsh word. And it basically says that we mostly walk through the world and act in the world without noticing what level of complexity the world is offering to us and not adjusting to that level. And it distinguishes between things that are predictable and things that are unpredictable, which I think is this very fundamental question we should be asking ourselves. Is this predictable? Do I know how this is going to go? Or is this unpredictable? Because it went this way last time, is it going to go this way the next time? And we see people, even right now, like with all this back to work, back to the office, like there's no back. This is an unpredictable moment. We have no idea what's going to happen next. And so in this space, in the predictable world, you can use your expertise, you can use your best practice, you can use your expert opinion, and you can draw out really solid plans for how to get from here to there. Snowden breaks those down into what he calls the simple or the obvious or the clear domain, which is where everything is like very known. And the complicated domain, which is where things are find-outable, but you kind of need a lot of expertise to do that, or you need a lot of experience. You need to hire somebody.
Yeah.
And then you cross into the unpredictable world, and your expertise and your beliefs that things are well known is actually your enemy. It gets in the way. It pushes you into these mind traps because you feel like you know what's going to happen next. Your whole body is engineered, evolved for you to believe that you know what's going to happen next, and you're just wrong. And so you can march wrong for quite some time before it really gets you that you have believed that tomorrow was going to be like yesterday.
I've seen this before. I know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Last time I did this. So all in, we go and do that again.
Exactly. Or it'll never work. Yeah. We tried that 6 years ago. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now. The more we research into the connection between our bodies, our emotions, our thoughts, the more we discover that our bodies are prediction machines. We are constantly trying to eliminate uncertainty, because uncertainty for much of human history was distracting. If you were distracted, you could be prey. Right? Like, this is a very easy little story we can see from a long time ago. Now, if we're not paying attention to uncertainty, if we're not paying attention to the ways we are mispredicting, this is very worrisome.
And for me, that there was a real aha moment here when you couple this as well with your rightness around believing that in yourself and what you've done, the ego piece. When you couple that with this, and if I think I'm in the complicated, I've seen it before, I have an overinflated view that I'm going to be right, and look at where I got to. My ego says, I'm great. Therefore, you build up a confidence, and as people get more senior, I guess that bit's greater and greater, and you then end up with I know what we do this, and you miss the fact that you're working in complexity and it's not the world you thought you were in, and didn't ask the questions, weren't curious about the alternatives, and you can see how very quickly things can go horribly wrong.
Especially because then you're a leader, so you have status, so people don't want to disagree with you. You get into the agreement mind trap. So the data you could have access to that might show you were wrong if you were curious enough to look for it, people withhold from you. So it really does. We have set up leaders in many ways in organizations to be in this reinforcing loop of unhelpful thinking and feeling for a very complex world.
I can see some of your other elements even reinforcing, making up simple stories. Seeing that, I simplify it, and I miss the weak signals that are telling me it's wrong. Find people that reinforce this. I can see how all of this together becomes incredibly powerful, but not in a good way.
Exactly right.
Jennifer, it must be a pretty uncomfortable experience if you're a leader and you're now starting to think, okay, I've had a healthy and a successful career of being right, of knowing the answer, of the person in control, to say, well, actually, now I'm going to sort of embrace a much more open mind. The unpredictability of things can go wrong, and that's okay. That's part of my role to nurture that. That must be pretty uncomfortable for a leader getting into that. Do you have any stories from your work about any particularly transformative projects or coaching experience of where people have applied this and really seen some results?
It's a great question. I did a piece of research like 1,000 years ago about the ways some people face into this discovery with horror, right? As you say, this is like their careers flash before their eyes in a way, and they think, oh, what do I do now? They feel panicked. And some people face into it with like a kid in a toy shop. Like, oh my goodness, I had no idea there was this much cool stuff to go after. And really the thing, by the time somebody hires me, they're either like that kid in a toy store and they want to know how to navigate it with more grace, or they're in some pain. It has gotten very exhausting to try and hold together the illusions that we are required if we're going to live in this more predictable, controlled world. And it takes an extraordinary toll on our bodies and on our relationships and on our sense of self. Ultimately, it's really not fun. And so there is a way it feels like some of what I get to do is just open people up to a new set of possibilities. And I've had them just wonderful experiences of people who have been in terribly intractable organizational challenges that have been making their lives miserable, the lives of their teams, the lives of their teams. You can just see this thing cascading misery through an organization. And then they come in with a different approach, an approach that's about noticing the system, about letting go of their own, belief that the right answer thereafter is the right answer, full stop. Like magical things happen. I had a leader I was working with who was talking to me about how when he knew what the right answer was, and when he got to a place where he could put down the right answer, suddenly it turned out everybody had better ideas than he did. And they weren't ideas that were, perfect and that would accomplish 100% of his goals, but they would accomplish 90% of his goals and 90% of other people's goals, instead of being in a kind of a win-lose situation that he was locked in. And the challenge just unraveled, right? The intractable knot just opened. I know it sounds a little bit like magic. It can sometimes feel a little bit like magic. And then people become like very entranced by this as an approach, right? And so that becomes a new self-reinforcing pattern.
I could share an example that is a bodily one, that I was short-sighted for many, many years and wore glasses and then wore contact lenses. And one day was brave enough to have laser eye surgery. And I would say, as many people who've had it have said, it was definitely the best thing I've ever done, because when you open your eyes, it was like the light, someone switched the light on in the world. And you could see in a completely different way. And in how you're talking there would describe that you're giving people the tools there to see the world in a slightly different way, and then see different results from the behaviors and the things that they're putting into the world.
Yeah, and it's beautiful, right? People see other people's humanity in a different way. People see other people's brilliance in a different way. People feel genuine connection for one another in a different way. So it's not just useful. It is useful, but it's also beautiful.
Jennifer, could I ask about curiosity and you personally? What are you personally curious about at the moment?
I'm curious about everything. So I've been really, really intrigued right now in how sort of the thing that keeps me up at night is this question about how do we manage our nervous systems in a time when I really think our nervous systems evolved to handle complexity and threat for 1% of the time, and then not complexity, not threat for 99% of the time. And now that the balance of that has really, really shifted, our nervous systems are going all the time in a threatened direction. And so I'm super interested in this question of how is it we can learn to recognize and soothe our own nervous systems, and how can we help leaders and organizations and people and families also take our nervous systems as like a legitimate player at the table and say, this is a thing that we need to be thinking about. We need to be designing for. This is us. This is our whole bodily interconnected system. And I think if we took it seriously, big changes would happen. But I don't know how to talk about it without sounding like a cheerleader or like a yoga instructor.
Very practical research. So one of our previous podcast guests, Jackie Brassi, has been looking into the link between curiosity and vagal tone from our as you well know, our vagus nerve, which is a wonderful term. It means the wandering nerve in the body, right, which is connected to our stress levels. And what we understand from Jackie in her research is that by being curious, that you can lower the stress levels in your body. So there are practical things that you can do to start to interact with your own nervous system, which I think is some of the things you're getting to there.
It's amazing, right? And we can begin to design approaches that are much better for the nervous system than the approaches we have right now. And I think we could do all that on purpose, right? And then we would be creating really different cultures and really different families and really different ways of being together.
Do you have any questions for us?
So I do. I'm wondering how writing this book has changed your lives.
I can start. I mean, the way we wrote the book, firstly, was tremendously different. We were three of us in different countries for most of it. And we took all of our research and information and threw it into this The Evernote was what we used. And then we started to cluster the information. And as we got more and more, we went broader, and our table of contents constantly shifted, constantly. And it was a weird dialogue between all the research, which was multidisciplinary, plus the table of contents, which was shifting, which started to reveal the narrative that we found and the stories we wanted to tell. And that approach made a huge difference to me, and how you could work together with other colleagues across time and space. And the other personal thing was just becoming a curious leader. I have had a number of ahas, specifically around critical thinking, and I think my fellow authors may have noticed some of this too, as I've been on my own journey, where you do move from being the person with the answers to having to be really considerate and thinking about what is the questions that we could ask here that would really allow us to be more curious and also empower the people that we're working with. So yeah, it's certainly changed my management style, and is doing so all the time.
Cool.
The thing that I've most loved about it, that what I've discovered about curiosity, it's almost like Ariadne's red thread that joins up so many different worlds, from neuroscience, history, complexity thinking, right down to sort of luck. So many different ideas, which has meant that we've been able to speak to so many amazing people, such as yourself, about the work that they've been doing. I think my aha, and the thing that I sort of carry with me each day, is the one around confidence. That confidence doesn't come from knowing that you can do things well, but knowing that you can do things when things don't go well, and how to practice things not going well so that you can build your confidence, which I think speaks to some of the things that you're talking about with Mindtraps as well.
Yeah, I think for me, it's probably linked to the first two of our 7 C's, actually, around context and community. So context, I think we wrote the book, and that tried to capture, I guess, our knowledge, but the community that we're finding as well, you learn more about the context and learn. I mean, curious about curiosity, but the community unlocks all of this information. There's people who help make the connections. There's people who unlock new information, and you also realize how much you also don't know, and how much there still is to be curious about and to learn. And sort of back to what you said earlier, that this curiosity isn't really an area that had much attention or much written about, and therefore we're all learning. How do you nurture curiosity, the value of curiosity, the tracking down the concrete evidence that shows the impact that it can have, and we've discovered an incredible curious community on the journey so far, and all of these conversations are just so energizing to learn more all the time about the topic area.
Did it change? I'm sure it changed your relationship with one another, but did it change your other relationships, this quest of yours?
Ooh, good question.
It's definitely changing my relationships with my staff and the people I work with. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I can see it having a tangible impact on the way that I connect with people who work with me, without doubt. Family too. I'm listening more. I read a wonderful thing yesterday which said, when you're listening, rather try and listen with the person than try and see through the person. And that made me think, we're always trying to figure out what's the backstory, what's going on, what are they actually trying to say. And that just said to me, listen to what they're actually saying and deal with that. And that's had me thinking about my relationships over the last 24 hours.
Yeah, that's glorious. Listen to the way they make sense of the world, as opposed to listening to what it means to you. And I love that.
I think for me, it's allowed the confidence to be able to talk about what we do, but also given me the confidence to recognize that there's so much that I don't know, and that's okay. And I think that's allowed me to be far more comfortable, back to what you were saying earlier, in not knowing the answers, in being fine to say, I don't know, I don't understand, all of those pieces. I think it's helped there, which in turn, I hope has helped some of the relationships with others around me as well.
How about you, Paul?
Okay, if I was to add one, I would say I like the way that it makes me think about the relationship I have with my children. And I give you a small story. So my son has just been doing his end of year exams. He's really not enjoyed chemistry this year. I remember not enjoying chemistry myself. And I said to him when he was doing his revision, I said, what you want to be is curious. If you can make yourself curious about the topic, then you'll be a better learner, because from our research, that's what we've discovered, that if you approach things with being curious, then you'll remember more and you can hack. They love the words hack things. So you can hack your learning. I think he looked at me with a rather sort of disparaging glare and told me to leave the room. But I certainly am trying to bring in some of the practical things we've learned about how to be more curious into what the children are doing and watching how they are curious, because that's the most fascinating thing. I think you said this earlier, how they continue to hold their curiosity almost no matter what. And I wrote this down, as you said it, as we get more into adulthood, we start protecting ourselves from the complexity of the world and stop being curious. So I think having children around and using them as a daily reminder to be curious, I think is really healthy. I find it anyway.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I definitely notice that I am a better mom when I am in a curious place with my kids. It can be easy for me to fall into, I think you ought to do X. And that just puts me in the wrong place with them. When I notice that's where I am, discovering why they want to do Y is just so much more fruitful an inquiry for us to be in. And it helps me appreciate my kids more. And certainly I think helps them appreciate me more.
Which maybe actually leads me to one bit we haven't covered that I touched on in the intro, which was the listening to learn, listening to win, listening to fix. And that was really insightful and I think highly relevant for dealing with kids and relationships as much as work as well. So maybe as one of our final points, you could share a little bit more on that.
This idea, I think, is very sticky. We're trying to figure out how to help people hold on to the difference between really listening to another human in the way that you were just describing, Garrick, right? And the difference between fake listening to another person. What I think of as what I used to talk about as listening to reload, where I listen to you in order to take evidence from what you've said to prove the point that I walked in with in the first place. And you can hear this is inside the rightness mind trap, right? This is like firmly in that space. And we came up with this way to describe it based on what we saw happening in the executive teams we were sitting with. We found that a lot of what happened is people would listen to each other in a way that they were just trying to win in some way, right? So we call it listening to win. They would, say, oh, Paul, I really agree with what you're saying and why you want to go left. And that's why we absolutely have to go right, because this is obviously the right thing. I mean, they were just absolutely not listening to each other at all. And they were cherry picking. At best, they were cherry picking little phrases or ideas or the odd fact in order to prove the thing that they were after. And we also do this at home all the time. When our little kid comes into us upset because a friend has been mean to them, we say, oh, no, Johnny wasn't really mean to you. Johnny's not really mean. This is not helpful to this little kid. This just says your feeling right now is immaterial to me. I would like you to feel a different way, please. Which I think a lot of our relationships with each other, we spend a lot of time saying to each other, I would like you to feel a different way, please. So this is listening to win. Then we have a whole industry about listening to fix, right? I'm listening to you in order to solve your problem. Whole sectors that are devoted to this quest. And basically it says, I sign up to be the hero of your story. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to listen to the things that you're saying, and as fast as possible, as though I'm playing a game show, I'm going to try and diagnose your thing and then give you a solution and try and convince you of it as fast as possible. This is actually quite a helpful thing to do under the right circumstances. In the complicated world, this is very helpful. When I go to an accountant and I say, here are my challenges, and the accountant asks me 6 diagnostic questions and spits out an answer at me, I feel so grateful. I just, peel off $100 bills and hand it to that accountant with such a smile on my face. But in complexity, this is absolutely unhelpful. because they're acting as though their context and their history is going to predict your future, which is not the way complexity works. And so I think it is about what Garrick was saying earlier, listening to the person the way they mean it, as opposed to listening to what it means to you. And the thing about listening to learn is I have to put myself at risk. It's listening as a creative act. I put who I used to be at risk, that I might hear something from you that changes me in some way, that changes my mind, that changes my opinion, that changes my sense of you or me or our relationship. It takes, I think, really significant courage. And often the fuel of that courage is curiosity. I spend a lot of time with the leaders I work with as they're facing into a tricky meeting or a tricky conversation or whatever the hard issue a leader might face would be. Spend a lot of time just getting curious about what's going on for other people. Because without that curiosity, I think it's very hard to listen without having it be fake listening.
Powerful stuff. Yeah. So we're nearing the end, Jennifer. We've covered some amazing things, the 5 mind traps. So first one of rightness, second one of making up simple stories, third one around into groups and how we tribe up, and then the fourth, how we love being in control, and the fifth, how we love our own egos. We've learned how curiosity is a great way out, and how can handhold to get curious again and reignite our curiosity. How things are only useful if we learn new things, we can burst through those paper screens, or that things will burst in around us through those paper screens if we're not curious. We think we're in a stable market, and actually we're never probably in a stable market, and we put ourselves in our own little bubble. We learnt about Cynefin, it's a bit of Welsh language for us, and the difference between the predictable and the unpredictable, and the dangers of thinking we're in the predictable and discovering that we're in the unpredictable, and how bad that can be. And then we heard some suggestions for how we can hack our learning as well, and encourage our kids to learn. And then very useful to listen to win, listen to reload, listen to fix, and listening to learn, and how the fuel for that is curiosity. So what would be, from all of that, and maybe broader, what would be the one thing maybe our listeners should take away from our conversation?
I think it's that all these ideas that we're talking about, they can be hard at first, but actually they deliver so much joy and connection and delight. I think that when we are at our best selves, when we are stretching into everything that humans are most capable of doing, we show up in curiosity, in wonder, in connection with one another. And we are made for this, right? Our nervous system evolved for us to be like this. Our nervous system evolved for us to sing and dance and play, and all of those things require curiosity. And so I think getting in touch with that fundamental part of what it is to be human, and taking off some of the armor that the modern world kind of tells us to cloak ourselves in, actually a fantastic ride.
Absolutely. So for all our listeners, maybe you need to think, how can you start to take off your armor and be a little bit more curious? Thank you so much for joining us, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So you've been listening to a Curious Advantage podcast. We're curious to hear from you. If you think there was something useful or valuable from this conversation, then we do encourage you to write a review for the podcast on your preferred channel, saying why this was so and what you've learned from it, and so much today that hopefully you took away. We always appreciate hearing our listeners' thoughts and having a curious conversation. So join us today at #CuriousAdvantage. And the Curious Advantage book is available on Amazon worldwide. Order your copy now to further explore the 7 C's model for being more curious. Subscribe today and keep exploring curiously. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Advantage podcast.
The Curious Advantage book is now available to purchase on Amazon.
Stay tuned for the next episode and keep exploring curiously. This podcast is produced by Aliki Paolinelis and John McGinty and edited by Jill Damatak-Futter.